Good afternoon or good evening to all of you all here in the platforms that you might be watching from. This is Talib Karim Muhammad, your friendly engineer turned lawyer turned mayoral candidate here in Washington, D.C. And first and foremost, I am a father, I'm a husband, and I am someone who has personally witnessed the devolution of marriages, both as a lawyer representing parents, both mothers and fathers, as well as someone who's gone through divorce myself. And I can relate to the conversation that many of us have been having around this topic. And so, with what we saw just the first on Thursday, and then again this weekend, no one actually connected the dots between what had happened actually earlier in the week, and that is the tragic shooting as a result of around 60 bullets, some estimate, in Northeast Washington, D.C., being fired, uh, ending the lives of two boys who were on spring break and whose only crime, apparently, at least from the surface, was sitting down eating after purchasing food from a food truck. This one story is connected to the second story, and the second story is connected to the third story. But no one is talking about that. The only thing you hear in this conversation are conversations about mental health. In one case, uh, the tragedy unfolding in Washington, D.C., having to do with youth violence and a lack of programming. And then the other case in Louisiana, issues of domestic violence, along with the case in Virginia. But those are not the underlying issues. And that is a conversation that we plan to have today. A very difficult conversation, nuanced conversation, but conversation that is needed nevertheless. And we need to talk about solutions, real solutions, not just surface solutions, but real solutions. So we want you to get involved, drop your comments, feel free to share this conversation, feel free to ask questions. If we can't get to your questions this evening, we absolutely can drop them in and follow back up with you. So I'm going to first and foremost put the backdrop of the conversation in with respect to the issues, particularly as it relates to the incident in Virginia and then the issue in Shreveport. But before doing so, let me introduce to you all our co-host for this conversation, someone who is no stranger to podcasts. In fact, he is the uh, brains behind a very successful podcast that has gone very viral. He is a colleague of mine that I've known pretty much all of my adult life as we met each other as teens at the United States Air Force Academy. And that is none other than Emille Bryant. Let's introduce Emille Bryant, a retired Air Force officer and life coach and entrepreneur. Um, let's welcome him to the stage. Emil, thank you, brother. I gave you a little bit of introduction, but I'm going to yield the floor to you so you can give a little bit better introduction of yourself than I did. Please forgive me for the just skim over, but dive into it a little bit more.
For sure. Thank you, Brother Talib. My name is Emille Bryant. I am a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel. My specialty when I was on active duty was in logistics and aircraft maintenance. I have since, leaving the military, begun a business, Go Ikigai LLC, which is a management consulting business. And I do a whole lot more than that, including develop strategy, business processes, business process engineering, and use many of the tools that were imparted to me during my career and beyond to help small business owners specifically, but not exclusively, blow their businesses up. What I want to see for every single person who works with me is a thriving individual at the heart of a thriving business. And that requires that we look at the individual and their growth and their development so that they become a whole person, and they then, as the center of their business, know who they are, what I call their ikigai. That's a Japanese word that means the reason why one wakes up in the morning. And from that, express that holistic health, wellness, and optimistic approach in their business and personal life, such that everything they do is a reflection of their purpose, their reason for being. It's been a joy working with hundreds of business owners over the past 10 years. And it has given me an understanding of some of the things that are happening in our world today, which brought me to you, Talib, where I am interested as a father, interested as a citizen, interested as someone who has worked with youth all of his adult life. I was a tutor in high school, and that's what really got me started on this path of knowing much about my community and being willing to engage with people who are in need of either educational help, mentorship, coaching. I do all of those things because I have a heart for people, and because I was given so much by so many people, from my uncles to my father to my stepfather to lots of men who poured into me, coaches who poured into me. And so it's only responsible of me to pour into others the way I was poured into, and to elevate as many as I can. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here to address this esteemed audience and to help you have this discussion. It looks like Talib is not here, so I will
Thank
continue.
you,
All right.
thank you, thank you.
I didn't know where you were, brother.
And I know how you do it. You would keep on going because you are a man who knows how to command the room and knows how to command a podcast. So we appreciate you, Commander, for being such a commanding voice, and someone who we have really seen grow and mature as a young fourth class cadet at the United States Air Force Academy, to someone who is really making a contribution. And I think this conversation is very timely, and we appreciate you having it. So let us back out a bit and go into the discussion about what happened. So stand
Sure.
by. I'm going to bring up the background. And then there was, of course, the tragedy in Virginia that followed like less than, I guess, 48 hours or so following that tragedy. And let's pull that up again. You know, it was almost kind of like the Almighty wanted to make it clear for those who could see. In Arabic, there is a saying, basically to the extent that, you know, yubayyin Allahu bima ya'malun, meaning to say that Allah makes it clear, the Almighty makes it clear for those who are of knowledge, or ulul bab, or other terms that are used for those who are willing, in fact, willing to see the connections. And so that's what we're talking about here. What are these? How are these things connected? And let's bring out the other one here. And I think as we get into this, I think that last point was something that nobody also really has bothered to dive into, that I would like you, Emil, specifically to touch on that last factoid about the daily fines for someone who is unable to pay child support, and what you think that is about, what you understand that is about as a person who is a father, and what you may have heard is about. So I'd like for you to dive into that, but let's again also tee up the last tragedy again that we believe are all connected, and we'll talk a little bit more about the connections. Stand by.
For sure. Just so you know, I haven't been able to see what you've been posting, so you'll have to make sure that I have the video with where I can watch it with you.
Okay. We'll tee it back up. All right, here we go.
No problem. But I'm ready to talk about whatever you need me to.
And you know what? We may have some situations with us watching it, and maybe the audience wasn't watching it either. So let's see. Stand by.
5 a.m. on Sunday morning, Shreveport police received the first call regarding a disturbance at a resident in the 300 block of West 79th Street. The caller stated that they were on top of a house. The suspect was inside and that a male had been shot. 3 minutes later at 5:58, dispatch received an additional call indicating the suspect was a relative of the caller. A minute later, 5:59 a.m., dispatch was advised that approximately 9 individuals resided at the location. The caller further stated that the suspect, identified as Shamar Elkins, had shot everyone inside the home. At 6 o'clock a.m., 1 minute later, the caller advised that she and her children had fled from the roof and were now in the backyard.
Feel a little overwhelmed. You might just be using it like a glorified Google, but if you really want to learn how to use
6:01 a.m., officers arrived on the scene. 6:03, officers made contact with the caller at the residence. At 6:05 approximately, officers requested the Shreveport Fire Department to stage at a nearby location close to Linwood. 6:07 a.m., a second call was received regarding a shooting in the 500 block of Harrison Street. The caller stated that her boyfriend had shot her, taken her 3 children, and fled the scene. 6:08 a.m., the victim identified the suspect as Shamar Elkins. At 6:10, dispatch linked the Harrison Street shooting with the shooting on West 79th Street, and that they all were related. At 6:15, officers received information that the suspect had carjacked a red Kia Sportage at West 79th, closest to Linwood. At 6:17 a.m., our traffic units out on random patrol encountered or observed that particular vehicle traveling southbound on Interstate 49. The officers advised at 6:18 that they were crossing the Red River Bridge into Bossier City. At 6:20, officers received information that the children taken from the Harrison Street residence may be inside of the fleeing vehicle. 6:23 a.m., officers advised that they were exiting near Swan Lake area. 6:25 a.m. approximately, officers located the injured victims from the Harrison Street shooting. 6:29 a.m., officers made contact with the suspect through an exchange of gunfire. At 6:30 a.m., officers confirmed contact with the suspect in the 400 block of Brompton Lane. 6:40 a.m., officers advised that the suspect vehicle was empty and no children were located inside. 6:43 a.m., officers cleared the resident of West 79th Street where multiple deceased victims were located. 7:03 a.m., Shamar Elkins was pronounced deceased at the scene on Brompton Lane. 7:14 a.m., the Shreveport Police Department contacted the Louisiana State Police.
So that is the backdrop of these stories, and I think that what I'm going to do, since apparently you guys did not see the other two, we'll go back and replay those, because I guess the video actually went out during the actual yeah. So let's get back and first of all pull up the first one about the story of the sad children. Let's pull that back up.
For business again, but things here are far from normal in the neighborhood. There is still a police presence on the scene. A police van has been here this morning. Cruisers going through the area, keeping an eye on things. Now, DC students, they are out of school for spring break, and yesterday afternoon there was a group of kids here in this parking lot of the convenience store on Kenilworth Avenue. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, police say 2 gunmen opened fire on the group. Investigators say a large number of shots were fired in a very short period of time. A 12-year-old and a 14-year-old were hit. I've been talking to people who live around here. They say it's very sad that the boys who were killed were so young, and they say something more really needs to be done to stop the violence. Now, some people I talked to did go on camera with me. Others did not want to be identified.
Now that's strange. That's very strange for somebody not to care about the children. The children should have been the number one priority here.
But they were the target.
Right. So I can't understand that. I really can't understand that.
Does it scare you?
Yes, it does.
I don't know. Really don't know. But when they get out of school, sometimes it'll be a whole crowd, so I don't really know. That's why I go home, come up here in the morning, and don't come back out.
Parents need to step up to the plate, and monitor kids more carefully.
So there were 2 gunmen involved in this, according to police, and both of them fled the scene and are still at large. Police gathering information. They've been looking at surveillance tape, talking to people who were in the area, trying to figure out exactly exactly who these two people are responsible for the deaths of two young boys. Adam, back to you.
And Megan, if you'll allow me, this is right next to DC 295, right? Like this is in a super busy corridor. So there's a lot of people who possibly could have witnessed this.
Yeah, so it was, first of all, a beautiful day yesterday. So there were a lot of people who were out and about. And I don't know, Jabri, if you can maybe pan over. So this parking lot right here with the convenience store, if you pan over to the side, the traffic that you're seeing there, that's actually 295, which of course is a very busy highway here. So 3:30 in the afternoon, there were a lot of people driving on the highway. There were a lot of people just out and about enjoying the weather. So a lot of potential witnesses here in the area when the gunfire started. Police have talked to some people. As I mentioned, they pulled surveillance video from the area, but they really want to talk to anybody who was in the area, might have seen someone running away, might have seen a car leaving the scene. Again, to piece together exactly what happened, who these two gunmen are, so that they can make some arrests.
Yeah, a tragedy in Northeast. All right, Megan, thanks for all those answers as we wait to get some more details about this case. Megan McGrath in Northeast.
So again, that was that tragedy, and we'll go now to the last one that we discussed as well.
Justin Fairfax shot and killed his wife, Dr. Serena Fairfax, and himself in a murder-suicide overnight. Thanks so much for joining us for the News 4 Rundown. I'm Mauricio Casillas. Reactions tonight are pouring in from across the region. Dr. Fairfax was an accomplished dentist, well-known and respected in the community, and the mother to two teenage children. Tragically, investigators say those children were inside the home at the time of the shooting. Justin Fairfax had high hopes of continuing what was once a prominent political career before two women accused him of sexual assault in 2019, which ended his ascent through the political ranks. Tonight, we are working for you with team coverage this evening. Northern Virginia Bureau Chief Julie Carey has more on how the couple is being remembered by those who knew him. But we want to start things off with our Drew Wilder, who has the very latest from police.
Police say there is no doubt the former lieutenant governor pulled the trigger, but what exactly set him off is still under investigation. Though tonight, we are learning that mounting marital problems and a pending divorce were fueling years of tension inside the Fairfax family home. He was once the second most powerful statewide politician in Virginia. Tonight, he's at the center of a murder-suicide investigation. Fairfax County Police say former Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax shot and killed his wife Serena, a well-known dentist, in the basement of the family's Annandale home. Police say after shooting his wife, Justin then ran upstairs to the primary bedroom and shot himself. The couple and their two teenage children were in the throes of what police describe as a messy divorce.
It all kind of culminated last night when Justin Fairfax shot several times, and killed his wife, ran to a different part of the home, and then killed himself.
According to court documents obtained by News 4, Serena Fairfax filed for divorce from Justin in 2025. Just last month, a Fairfax County judge granted custody of the children to Serena and ordered Justin to move out of the home by the end of April. In the custody opinion, a judge wrote, quote, "The wife testified that heavy daily alcohol consumption by the father has become the norm." The court documents say Justin Fairfax spiraled into alcoholism and isolated himself from family involvement following the 2019 sexual assault allegations against him while he was in office. Allegations he denied, but still weighed on him tremendously, the judge wrote. During the custody battle, the judge also found, quote, "The evidence also showed that in 2022, the father purchased a handgun with money intended for his children's horseback riding lessons." During the divorce proceedings, Serena Fairfax installed cameras throughout the family's home, according to police. Police say those cameras were rolling last night, just like they were back in January when Justin called police to claim that Serena had assaulted him.
We reviewed those cameras, and we corroborated that the alleged assault never occurred.
Court documents show evidence that Serena Fairfax was actively involved in her children's lives, finding no evidence that Serena ever engaged in inappropriate conduct and maintained great relationships with the two kids. The court found, however, that Justin was currently unable to have a healthy relationship with his kids due to his alcohol use and self-isolation within the home. The family's internal struggles were even becoming apparent to neighbors, according to Peter DeMayo.
Just amazed, shocked, and because I knew them.
DeMayo says it was clear Serena and Justin had some marital issues, but he would have never imagined it would end with both parents dead and detectives carrying out backpacks and lacrosse sticks, apparently belonging to the two kids.
Anything like this is upsetting, and you think about the children, because their futures are big time changed.
A man once considered a rising political star is now being called a killer, leaving two innocent children without parents. Justin and Serena Fairfax were set to return to court on Monday for the next phase of their divorce proceedings. We've also learned that the court was punishing Justin Fairfax for not complying with previous court orders. In fact, a judge had just ruled that Justin would be fined $300 for every single day that he did not comply with an order to pay restitution to Serena for money that the court said he owed her. Reporting in Fairfax, Drew Wilder, News 4.
And our coverage continues now with Northern Virginia Bureau Chief Julie Carey, who has reaction from the political world today.
I've known and covered Justin Fairfax for some years from his first campaign.
And so that is the background we're talking about today. The shooting and killing of two innocent boys, 12 and 14, in Northeast Washington, D.C. during spring break. The shooting and killing of Dr. Serena Fairfax and Justin Fairfax, and also the killing of 7 children, as I understand, in Shreveport, Louisiana. What are the connections between those? And do you see them, Brother Emille, as I see them?
So this is the challenge, and it's really, first of all, my heart goes out to all of the families that have suffered all of these tragedies. It is something that no one should have to endure. And so my heart is just, it bleeds for all of the families, from the Fairfax family to the family in Shreveport to the families here in DC. There's just no good explanation for all of this, but there is a background, there is a commonality that we must look at. And I've looked at the stats on domestic violence from the FBI, and there is a upward trend over the last 5 years in domestic violence, even while violent crime in America has gone down. So as we look at these issues, we really have to say what's going on, especially with African-American families. And where we find ourselves is in what I call a vise. And this is evidence. These are symptoms of that vise. It's not just man bad, woman good, or guns bad and no guns good. There's so many things happening, but there's a commonality here, especially amongst the Black families that we see. And the challenge that we need to start to look at is, if this is a symptom, what is the cause? If this is an indicator, what is it showing us? What is it pointing to? We know from just as many studies as you want to throw at the problem that crime is a function of employment. Crime is a function of stable families. Crime is a function of stable communities. So when a community is not stable, when a family is not stable, when employment is not stable, you're seeing the symptoms of that lack of stability in these very ugly incidents. But what you also begin to realize is that stability has underpinnings. There's something about that stability that has been lost in the last, we can go over, say, the last 50 years. And that stability, in my opinion, when you look at it historically, really comes from a very systematic attack on the things that made the family and community strong, right? So I was talking with you earlier, Talib, about COINTELPRO, and that was the counterintelligence program run by the FBI from the 50s through the 70s.
And in fact, can we pause that, because I think that's another piece, and I want to go into that one, but I want to step backwards to the point that you made about the economics, because I think it's without doubt the last point that the commentator mentioned was that the father was being fined $300 a day for failure to pay child support. Now, another report that I'd heard was that in, I think they said all of 2025. So they said that okay, if I may be wrong off my numbers, but they said in 2024 or 2023, when the proceedings first started, he reported a $400,000 income. But then the following year, which I guess was 2025, that income had gone down to 50,000. And then they said last year his income was only 11,000. Now again, it may be that it was 11,000 for this year, but even if you think about it, $11,000 for 4 months means that he has been able only to contribute just over a couple $1,000 per, or $3,000 if you will, per month to the family's upkeep. And that right there is clearly something that people need to understand, I think. And first of all, I don't think anybody, you nor myself or anybody else, would ever justify what happened. And clearly, we believe as Muslims, in fact, that worse than killing his wife was him killing himself. Because we believe as Muslims is that there's always a door for redemption. And mercy is only the province of the one who's the most creative, who's the most merciful, the Creator himself. He's the only person who determines whether or not mercy is going to be allowable or not. And that by you killing yourself, then you basically close the door of that mercy. You see what I mean? And instead of, again, facing whatever consequence and being able to perhaps repent for your sin, you eliminated that which is the worst thing that a person can do, and that is to close the door of mercy to themselves through, again, suicide. So, but that being said, is that we see, as you said before, economic instability is one of the number one contributors to the conflict between husband and wife. And another factoid that we found was that men account for some 85% of reports of domestic violence, at least in the District of Columbia, in terms of the cases that are before some of the agencies responsible for them. However, it is understood that this is based on an underreporting. Men do not report or do not call police on the mothers or the wives or the women in their lives who are committing domestic violence towards them, because it's considered, basically a weak and a cowardly thing to do, to call on that. So, and another element that we should also discuss is what are then the remedies when a report of domestic violence, or in the District of Columbia, a civil infraction or interfamily infraction, what they call it, occurs. Then the only what happens is that the mother or the wife or the the so-called domestic partner of the man can come and make a presentation to the court. They used to even be able to do them remotely. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but they come down to the court and their offices set up for them to make it very easy for the statements to be given. But there's no basically opposition. This is what they call a ex parte presentation. So that means that the other side doesn't have a right to make a rebuttal. And on that presentation alone, the court issues a finding that generally requires the husband to have, again, 78 hours or more of eviction from the home. But invariably, these lead to a 1-year eviction from the home that then trickles down to a permanent eviction from the home. And then what then goes this, you find that the data suggests that the children who are, again, parties to this interfamily conflict between the mother and the father, oftentimes, especially boys, you find that they then matriculate to the juvenile delinquency court, and then from the juvenile court to the criminal court. So that's what they call the family court to criminal court pipeline. It's, again, here in Washington, D.C., but it clearly is around the country. Can you speak to that? I know we want to get to the other historical.
Oh, for sure.
I want you to ask if you could dive into that a little bit more as well.
So this is something that I think a lot of people don't understand about the instability created by domestic or intimate partner violence. And this is something that I think, as we look at the studies and we begin to sort of unpack these root causes, we begin to see some problems emerge. And one of the problems that emerges is that instability breeds instability. So if a child in a family that has experienced domestic violence, intimate partner violence, they are now at risk for two things that are very easy to see. The first is they're going to repeat the model of behavior that they were shown. And that is, again, you can look at all the different ways that will manifest. But the second thing is there's no stable home life. There's no stable base. And we know that is a exacerbating factor for the potential for young women to get pregnant early, for young men to get into gangs and other types of violence or behavior that leads to those kinds of situations, like gangs, like violence, like crime. And those are the things that are very important that we have to look at, is how do we restabilize the children that come out of those situations so that they don't stay at risk, because the risk factor is there. What you were talking about with the ex parte proceedings for intimate partner violence in DC, that's a temporary protective order that is worth lasts about 14 days, 2 weeks, and then they go into a civil protective order where there's a more adversarial system so that the both parties get a chance to speak their piece to a judge.
On that point,
that is something that I think, though, that entire process destabilizes the children. Exactly. And that's what puts them at risk, because where do they go? Where's the landing space for a child who's experiencing that kind of environment? And when we don't see that landing space, we see them, and that's what we're seeing, is those children are beginning to go into the criminal court system because there's no place safe for them to recover, find the right models, and get back into a stable situation that leads to education, job opportunities, and other things that are productive in terms of the individual and society.
And now on that point, I think that there's, again, another element of this is not being spoken, but I want to dive in before we get into the other element that's not being spoken. I want to talk about the element that's here in terms of the question that was raised. And that's the issue of the financial and employment. And I think that she was going to probably say of our men. And I think that that's a really interesting dynamic that was definitely at play in the Virginia case that could have also been an issue with the Louisiana case, and that is the disparity between men and women, and Black men and women, in terms of employment. There's a suggestion that a significant number of women, particularly in the District of Columbia, it says 70% of the households in the District of Columbia are led by women, women breadwinners. And a significant number of the households where they're both men and women, mothers and fathers, maybe even husbands and wives, women still make more money than their husbands or the men in the homes. Now, there's two elements of that, and I'd like for you to address it. On the one hand, naturally, men are taught to have three roles. One role is the protector. The other role is the promoter. That's the emotional well-being, if you will, the encouragement, the looking out for the, really, mentoring, if you will, that a father is supposed to do. But then the last one, which, really a lot of women look as the first one, and that is the provider. And if the husband is making less money than the wife, there's a dynamic that exists in that home that in some cases creates what we see perhaps. And it's, as I understand, Dr. Fairfax had been making significantly more than her husband, maybe even when he was lieutenant governor, because of the success of her dental practice. So can you speak to two things from a solutions-oriented standpoint? What if this society purposely, some would argue, rewards and employs Black women at a pace that outpaces their male counterparts, and men marry wives, and maybe might start off where the husband is making more, and then the wife starts making more and continues. How do you suggest that men and women engage in that type of dynamic without leading to the tragedies that we saw unfold?
So this is incredibly important, because in our society, we cannot limit, especially as Black people in America, we cannot limit our self-esteem, our self-image to what other people say is important. And that is very difficult to do when you haven't had a model to show it. But I'm going to go out on a limb in this conversation and say it this way. The family unit has to be willing to accept that the individual contribution of each member has no diminished or increased value based on the numbers. A lot of people want to say, I make the money, I wear the pants. And that sounds great until things get reversed. And then it becomes, well, if we're really in this together, the family unit is what matters, not necessarily who is providing more of anything. Then it's incumbent upon each member of the family to decide what is their best role in that family unit. If a woman can make more than the man, that's not a bad thing necessarily, but who's going to manage the money? Who's going to be the one responsible for making sure the household is maintained properly? Who's going to manage their investments and retirement funds? Who's going to manage the day-to-day bills and operation of the home? Those are questions that need to be answered very actively and very consciously by the family. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll say my value to this family unit is based on my contribution financially and not necessarily on roles we chose for ourselves. So a man can be a protector, can be a provider, can be a promoter if he understands that his contribution is not limited to dollars. That doesn't mean he should be a layabout. He doesn't mean he should not do everything in his power to provide as much as he can for his family. But it does mean that if they are so blessed that the woman makes more than the man, it isn't a default position that she now says, this is how I run the family and you have to listen to me. Nor should it be the man saying, I'm the man and therefore I run the family and you, even though you're making all this money, do not. It has to be decisions made consciously by the family so that each of them knows that there is no value or worth increased or decreased because of numbers, but rather because we chose to engage in a relationship where each of us has made a conscious decision as to how we can best support this family. So that the woman, when she makes money, can feel safe, not because she is making more money, but because she has a partner, a husband who recognizes that as the person who can make more money in the relationship, he's willing to do the things that help her do that successfully. On the other side of the equation, if he's making more money, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean default. That the default is he is now the breadwinner and therefore the decision maker. These are questions that a family that is growing together, that is trying to provide for their children, legacy, for the future of their community, have to answer consciously. We can't default to old ways from the 1950s, the 1960s, or even the 1990s. It has to be a discussion. Okay, honey, who's going to have the best possible way of bringing money into the family unit? And upon that discussion, it might mean that the husband has to take a lesser financial role, but that doesn't diminish his role as a father, as a husband, and as a protector of the family unit. Those are questions that can be answered and should be answered by a family who's willing to discuss them in a healthy and open way.
Brother, I really appreciate that. And that's something that, again, you just don't hear. And I want to ask if you could dive into that with the context of, or the lenses of social media, which are, again, algorithmic based content that are being targeted to people, particularly our people here in the District of Columbia, with the goal of, we argue, that has been demonstrated in the Epstein files as being correct, to destabilize families, to cause children to be drawn away from their families, so then they can be runaways and other, again, they can be victimized by people who worship the devil, as we see in these files, and whose desires are to abuse and prey upon these children, and in some cases to literally devour our children. So what do you recommend for fathers, perhaps, or mothers, or people, extended family members who see parents consuming social media in this way, and understanding or fearing the type of outcomes that we see, where you begin comparing your relationship falsely to some artificial, created image of a relationship? You begin to say, oh, I don't have these things, we haven't taken these trips, and you begin to feel like you are personally under attack because your husband has not given you those things that you believe that you are owed. And then that the husband who was your lover then becomes your enemy. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So there's a very nefarious and ugly formula brewing in our nation that we really need to address. Recently, Meta, Snap, Google have all been found in courts of law to manipulate algorithms to make young girls feel bad, to make individuals enraged. They get more money, more clicks. It's called stickiness, that the desire of someone to watch and continue watching more and more. Those are all being manipulated through the algorithm. And then if you look at the algorithm's output, the things that it's showing you, it's designed to prey upon the vulnerabilities in our biology. So envy, greed, lust are all being shown to us over and over again through these algorithms, forcing us to compare ourselves to one another. These are not my opinions. These are facts established in courts of law in New Mexico and other states where these major corporations have been found liable for young women and other people's behaviors because of how they're using this and manipulating these algorithms. So I say that because if we are not aware that these corporations are using these tools to manipulate our biology, we will become subject to their manipulation. We will become victims of their plan to harm us, and they do it knowingly. They have internal studies. In all of these courts of law, they produced internal studies that showed the damage and danger they were doing to communities during this time. So we can't say it was by accident. They knew what they were doing. They made choices to do it. The margin between Meta being more evil or less evil was literally 1%. They wanted that 1% more money, and they got it by using those algorithms. Now, when you say, when we talk about all of this, we recognize that there's a danger. Families have to begin to put their phones down. We have to encourage each other to start looking at game night and taking walks around the neighborhood and doing things together as people who used to connect on a human level because we didn't have phones, and we lost that because we are now addicted to these algorithms. So it becomes a conscious effort from every single person in the family unit in the neighborhood to get out beyond the home. We have to start talking about doing things. A friend of mine is encouraging us brothers in his little community and circle to join him on a cooking night at his church. That is something that we should all be wanting to do. Go out and see things, be a part of something greater than ourselves, because these algorithms are absolutely designed to harm us. And one of the things that we must also recognize, if we're really going to be about solutions, is that there have to be some real alternatives so that people stop measuring their lives by what they see. It's like watching the A-Team. If you remember the A-Team from the 80s with George Papard and Mr. T and all of the characters, they would shoot 1,000 bullets during an episode and nobody would ever get shot.
Right.
That's social media. That you see one very curated picture of a family or of a couple, and you do not know anything behind it. Those curated pictures, those curated presentations are just as fake as Hollywood. Just like you see 1,000 bullets flying, but nobody getting shot in the A-Team, and you can recognize that as fiction, then you should be able to look at social media as the same thing. It is pure fiction. And people who are looking at these other people and saying, I want my life to look like that, are assuming, based on a lack of understanding of how social media works, that they are being presented a very narrow, one-dimensional picture of another person's life. And that curated picture is not to be used as a measuring stick. What I say in some of my work as a writer is you cannot measure one river with the same stick from another river. Once you use one measuring item, you are done with that, because the moment you try to use Emille Bryant's life to measure Talib Karim Muhammad's life, you run the risk of assuming that we have the same background, that we have the same outlook, that we have the same upbringing, that we have the same education, that we have the same opportunities, and we don't. But people have a hard time disengaging from social media and looking at it as pure entertainment. But they can do that for the A-Team. They can do that for Creed. They can do that for Black Panther. But when it comes to social media, they find themselves thinking that this is real life, and somehow I should have what that person has. Those false pictures are creating false realities that are rubbing up against the actual reality that people live. And that's creating the dynamics we're seeing, where people who are disappointed are reacting to the disappointment when they are using the wrong barometer, the wrong thermometer, the wrong measuring stick from jump.
Well, brother, I can say that this has been an amazing conversation, brother. And that is the reason why we're running for mayor. We're running for mayor to change the status quo. The people currently in office don't consider the children that are in our community their own, one, and nor do they consider the children as being the responsibility of the parents. And that's the reason why whenever these tragedies take place, the parents are never even, really connected or even referenced either in the media stories or even in the context of the court proceedings. And because their idea is that the children belong to the state, the children belong to them as it relates to our children. Now, we talk about children in the other parts of the community where I live in Ward 3, it's a whole conversation difference, but you talk about our children, they see a lack of agency. And that's one of the things we plan to end on day one. We plan to eliminate the civil protection order system and replace it with a more coaching and a better system of negotiation and of settlement-based resolutions. We also plan to start teaching parenting in schools, because there's a reality, brother, nothing we didn't talk about, but some families come from a history of not just conflict, but this you call it sexual tension, if you will, where there's a feeling that, hey, if we're not engaged in some type of physical conflict, then you don't love me. And that's a reality in a lot of households, and we got to deal with it. You know what I mean? Because again, this court system doesn't reflect that or doesn't appreciate that.
Dr. Jewel Pookrum is one of my favorite lecturers. You can find her on YouTube, and she called that the residue of slavery, where we have a chemical addiction to drama. We have a chemical addiction to strife. And those are things that we are going to have to become conscious and aware
it's not,
of.
hold on, but it's not just in Black families, though. Let's be clear. These are families beyond just the Black construct. You will find this, especially in immigrant families, you know what I mean, who didn't have any experience with slavery. So
I agree. And I'll tell you that those chemical addictions are something that have to be confronted, and they have to be elevated to the conscious level for us to deal with them. So imagine that the brain and body work together to soothe one another. And at some point there was a trauma in the past, and the brain acted on the body to soothe the body, get the heart rate down and all that sort of stuff. The fact that happened may be a trigger for a chemical addiction, where the brain seeks out an opportunity to get that high and then again bring the body back into regulate itself.
Well, that's a whole nother topic.
To look at, elevate to the conscious level, and then recognize that calm is good. And that is scary for a lot of people, because if calm is good, how do I know I'm loved if they're not yelling at me? How do I know I'm loved if they're not trying to, bow up on me? How do I know I'm loved if somebody isn't, causing me some sort of reaction?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Worth a lot more than people realize once they experience it. We have to normalize peace in many households, and that's going to take a lot of intervention. And many of us are going to have to ask people like you, who are going to be in positions that, as a potentially as mayor, or especially as a candidate, where you're going to have to elevate this and say, what are we doing to break the cycle of addiction to chemicals released from these traumas?
Well, brother, I want to just say how grateful we are for you being willing to have this conversation. I tell you, I spoke to almost a dozen brothers who are afraid to have this conversation because they didn't want to, be attacked. And some men are being excoriated for even saying something different from than the algorithm. Think about this. The algorithm says that all you can talk about is domestic violence and all you can talk about is mental health. You can't say anything else. And so anybody who says something else, again, gets basically scorched through social media. And it's not by mistake. It's because the algorithms are driving conduct, just like they drove certain outcomes from on the election booth. So we have to be willing to be brave enough to call out the wrong. And that's what you get in someone like myself. I don't fear man. I don't fear the loss of money. I don't fear embarrassment. And that's what you see, I think, also playing out with respect to the situation in Virginia. Somebody who felt that his life was over. But if you believe in a creator, someone who is not the creation, you understand that status, fame, money, even your life itself is in the hand of someone greater than yourself. And that while one day you can be in point A, that only the Almighty knows where you will be in point B, in point C, and point D. Brother, and I'm going to tell you, again, I'm a firsthand byproduct. This happened to me. I was accused of, again, a interfamily conflict. And I know I hadn't been doing anything but providing, promoting, and protecting my home. You know what I mean? I knew this. You know what I mean? But this was the claim. And so because this was the claim, people thought it was a kiss of death. I lost my, big $150,000 job, and, people thought that I would never have any type of, career or future or anything like that. Brother, but you got to understand that it is not, again, in the hands of man, your outcome. Your outcome is in the hands of the Almighty. And everything that you encounter is a test. But we're not teaching that, because we are teaching nihilism. We're teaching, ingratiation of towards money and of status and fame. We're really teaching devil worship. That's really what devil worship is about. When you don't worship the creator, you worship the creation. You know what I mean? And that is the problem. That is the sad reality. And that is what we pray that we can convey in our message, to tell people to stop worshiping money, stop worshiping social media, stop worshiping, what trips that you want to go on or what clothes that you want to wear. To really, again, as you said, seek the peace by, again, putting your faith and your trust in the Almighty. And with that, our children will be safe, our homes will be excellent, our economics will be better, and this society will truly be a society. The District of Columbia will be a place that everybody wants to come and enjoy, because it will be a safe, affordable, and finally free. Brother, I appreciate you. I know we went a few minutes behind the time you're cut off. But I appreciate you so much. May the Almighty.
No problem.
And if
brother, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And to all of the people who are paying attention and listening, I thank you very much for your time. And all I ask is that you get involved. Please vote. Please use the opportunities we have to speak a message to power and authority. We have to be willing to stand up to the people who would manipulate us into bad behavior. Someone like Talib is doing his best, but it's also up to each one of us to do our part. You don't have to be on social media. You don't have to go on stage. You don't have to be a fantastic speaker. You don't have to run a nonprofit. Wherever you are, you can do something. And that's all I ask, is that everybody who's listening, just do your part. One little thing every day will make a big difference for a lot of people if we just show up. So just show up every chance you can.
Well, I am putting your website for people who want to go and get in contact with you there. We are, again, very grateful for you, brother, for all of your great works. And we, again, continue to pray for your success and your family's success, and ask that the Almighty blesses us to work together and win together. This has been an amazing conversation, timely conversation. This is Talib Karim Muhammad, your neighborhood lawyer, engineer, father, mentor, and prayerfully on November 3rd, your next mayor of Washington, D.C. Let us work together and let us win together. Peace and blessings.